You are now listening to The Unwavering, the movement dedicated to educating and empowering the brave men and women who have or are still serving our great nation. So across the board, we've got a few E5s. Wanted to kind of bring together different perspectives from different branches. Each of us has our own story to tell. We all went through different things, but as service members, there were things that we went through that are common to each of us. And so I also want to say that the reason why this podcast is so important to each of us is this is kind of our opportunity to give back to, the people that we've served with, those who are still currently serving, them and their families who continue to give so that we can live the life that we do. So before we begin, thank you guys. This episode, I wanted to talk to you guys about something that helped me make a transition and, helped these guys as well. When I was making a transition, I found it really hard. I had a solid game plan. I had some really great mentors, but I was still extremely nervous making that transition. And I think for me, one of the tools that I found valuable was one that I actually never even heard of. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. Each branch has a military compensation chart. For each branch, it's going to be located somewhere different, and I'll go ahead and put it in the description below, but once you go there, it's going to break down what you're actually worth. So for me as an E5, if I went according to my W-2, I was only in like the 36,000 a year range, where according to my military compensation pay, I was closer to the 96 range.
Yeah, I got out and I looked at my earnings and I'm like, okay, I was making around 45,000 a year. Like, I'm going to get a job in Southern California and I'm going to be making like 60 and that's going to be great. But in reality, like in the military, I was making so much more than I didn't even realize it, just based off of benefits and the education and health and everything. It really adds up pretty quick.
Housing's humongous too, because people don't take into consideration how expensive it is once you actually get out. And almost there's no job, nobody that I know anyways, that has their housing paid unless they're contracting overseas or something after they get out.
Yeah, and I was stationed in Hawaii, so my housing was quite a bit and kind of a shock when you move away and all of a sudden you're not getting that allowance anymore.
Right, and that definitely brings up a good point, because for myself, I don't know, it was a little bit easier. I wasn't as nervous because, I was getting out of the military, I was single, I didn't have kids, I didn't have a dependent, but I know, like, for yourself, Gerard, this was something you definitely had to take in consideration.
It was insane, man, especially because I didn't even have kids yet. My twins, it wasn't even a single kid. I had twins, and they were on their way into this world when I was getting out. And it was, like I said, it was kind of unforeseen. So here I am getting out of the military, moving from one country to another. I was in Germany at the time, so I'm on my way back to the United States after 4 years of living away. I haven't seen family in an extended period of time. It was a really difficult time. It was.
When I was getting out and I decided I wanted to leave the East Coast because my last duty station was Quantico, I said, you know what? I've been out here a few years. I want to go back west. I came out here and the hardest thing for me was being able to put my value on a piece of paper. I knew what my value was in my mind, but I was looking for something to kind of say, hey, this is what I'm actually worth. And I didn't want to go into a job negotiating, and when they asked me, okay, what did you make at your previous job, say, oh, well, according to my W-2, I was in the 30 to 40 range, because then they just look at me like an idiot and they'd be like, okay, you're hired, we'll give you 60.
Yeah, and really you're pumped about that 60. That's the exact thing that I did. I got out, I actually took a little bit of time, and when I got around to finding a job, I got an offer that was high 60s, and I was like, this is great, I'm going to be making so much money, when in reality I found out a little bit later I was worth quite a bit more.
And that's exactly how I felt. It was the same exact story, literally. I was really happy because I was transitioning into a federal government spot, so there was a little bit of a transition there instead of just going straight civilian afterwards, but super happy. I was like, man, I'm making 68 grand, it's going to be perfect, we're going to be able to buy a house, all of that stuff, and that just was not the case. And here I'm trying to provide for my family, find a house, start a new job, and then I realized that I couldn't even afford a condo, especially because of what do you call it, HOAs? HOAs were killing me. The payment for an HOA was almost as much as it was for the actual house payment, so I was screwed completely.
Sounds like we all kind of came from a similar standpoint, where it's like we got out and we didn't really know our worth, so there are some tools to help us out and help us calculate what we can actually make in the civilian world.
Definitely. And that's really what I wanted to get across today was there's tools out there. You may not have heard of them, but if you don't start doing the research now and you don't start, planning and having that foresight, it's just going to lead to disaster. You may get lucky and you may have some really good friends who hook you up on the outside, and that's great, but you still need to have a plan, if not multiple backup plans, because you never know. Gerard will probably get into it a little bit later, but like he said, when he got out, he didn't want to get out. He was kind of forced out. He still wanted to continue to serve, but he wasn't really given that option. So for him, it was a little bit different of a situation. But what are some things that you guys found that kind of helped you negotiate a better salary?
So when I was getting out, about halfway through my enlistment, I knew that I was going to be a one enlistment and done. And so I had quite a bit of time to prepare myself. I know there's a lot of tools out there, really organizations that can help you with your transition, but me being on a submarine, it was kind of solo individual effort, and so I really had to take the time and set myself up. And one of the big things I've actually found to be extremely helpful for me was my security clearance. I know both of you guys had your clearances, but when I was getting out, I was actually given a phrase by the Navy that said, on your resume, this is what you can write, and don't write that you actually have a clearance. And I can actually tell you guys what that phrase is. I have it written down. It's granted eligibility for top secret information based on an SSBI completed by OPM on this date, granted eligibility.
And that's pretty intense.
Yeah, to put that all on your resume when you're trying to make this one document that's short and concise and it's going to catch people's eyes, they're going to look at that and have no idea what you're talking about. In the civilian world, it's bogus, really.
Did they tell you that's all you can write?
They told me that's what I should write on my my resume, and I shouldn't write anything else.
See, and they have like weird misconceptions because they make it seem like it's this absolute rule, but in my mind, I was like, I'm going to be a civilian. I don't really care what you say.
They made it seem like if you don't write this, if you write something different, you're going to lose your clearance. And it's incorrect. So I did a little bit of research last night. I looked up what you can and cannot write. And actually the NSA puts out a pretty good document that says what we can actually write on there. They give you some hints on this document and we can add it to this podcast. But basically what it says is you can straight up say that you have a top secret clearance or a secret clearance or whatever clearance you have. Just know that you're kind of putting yourself out there, and especially if you're posting your resume to job sites like Monster, know that people can search and say, this guy now has a clearance. And that could be a good thing and a bad thing. I know there's a lot of recruiters out there who probably look and say, we need a guy with a clearance. And so they type in clearance or they type in secret. And if you have that in your resume, they're going to find you, which is great. But also there's people out there who are trying to take advantage of you. So if you have secret clearance in your resume, they can find you. And
that's actually pretty true. So I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I would have never considered something like that. I never got told anything about how to write that, or I never even really thought about it other than I saw an example on another resume, and it said clearance, colon, secret.
Yeah.
So that's how I wrote mine. I just pretty much copied it from another resume. So I wouldn't have even, I didn't consider that whatsoever.
Yeah, you really just have to evaluate the risk. And if you are going to put something like that, you really have to
have your guys ready.
Yeah. Watch out what's coming your way. So really what I found effective for me is just a simple bullet point that says top secret clearance. And that was it. I'm not going to write any more. I'm not going to...
Did you hide it inside there and encrypt it?
Yeah. I'm not going to write any extra information. I'm not going to write about any projects I'm on. I'm just going to write I have the clearance. That way if the job requires it, I'm good to go. And then I was just on the lookout for any suspicious emails or any activity like that at all. It worked out pretty good for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When I was going through, they didn't tell me that there was something I specifically had to write. And this was coming, from some of the guys like my chain of command or some guys who were getting out. They just said, look, when people are looking over your resume, you want to tell them as much as possible in as few words as possible. So for me, they told me, hey, just break it down as simple as possible. And I ended up putting, active TS, SSBI clearance as of this month and this year. So I try to keep it short and sweet. But I'm really glad that you brought up, the clearance part, because for a lot of people who go into the military, especially on the enlisted side of the house, right? a lot of us go in, I know myself and a few others who I'm very close with went in directly out of high school. So I didn't have a college degree. I'm still 2 semesters away from getting my bachelor's degree. So what can I do when I'm going to a new job to kind of set myself apart, or at least increase my value in the eyes of the employer?
Yeah, and a clearance is huge for that. Coming into a job with that already, you're saving them money. It's invaluable, really.
Absolutely. And then even if you don't have an active clearance, so that's something that I had no idea about before I actually got into the workforce and on the civilian side and figured out that a company needs to carry your clearance.
Yeah.
They need to actually accept it and keep it solid. So I didn't know anything about that. And after learning that, that can be a really big deal. Even if you have to change your verbiage just a little bit on your resume, things like qualify, secret clearance qualified or some type of statement. Obviously, I'm just going off the cuff there, but it can make a huge difference. Even if you don't actively carry it, you can still say that you qualify for it, and that can instill a lot of confidence in a future employer.
Yeah, because after a while, your clearance actually expires and has to be renewed. So
right.
If you are unemployed or working a job that doesn't carry your clearance, is not sponsoring it, your clearance will expire.
Right. And I think it's something like 2 years.
I believe it's 2 years of
Yep.
inactive time, yeah.
And then once they do that, once there's a lapse that long, then you have to restart the whole process over. So then you have to go through Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, and the system's always backed up. So just do your due diligence. If you want to, stay in a field that's going to utilize that clearance, make sure you're staying on top of it. Make sure hey, I'm a year and a half out from it expiring, so you can renew it. Make sure you bring it up to the people that you work with. And it's just another thing to have to kind of give you some flexibility when it comes to negotiating. So I'm just saying it may make a difference, it may not, but I know for myself it made a huge difference, honestly, tens of thousands of dollars, just because I had that clearance. And again, I went into this job not having my degree yet, but because I had that clearance and, certain experiences, that's honestly why I believe that they chose me. So.
Yeah, and you start to bring up another good point where not only does it cost a lot of money to get the clearance, it takes a lot of time. If you're gonna get a secret clearance, that's at least a year. To upgrade to a top secret, you're looking at a considerable addition to that time.
Yeah. And that's insane to me. I didn't even realize that it takes that long.
Yeah, for myself, it ended up taking 18 months for me to end up going from secret to top secret.
For my job, it was about a year before they said, okay, you're going to need your clearance for this. And they started interviewing me. And it's crazy what they do for the interviews. Like, they were going back to people I went to kindergarten with and interviewing them. And like, I haven't seen that guy forever. And then another person, I saw him drinking at a bar the other night. He seemed like an okay guy. Like, what are they going to tell him,
We won't go off too much on the tangent, but they definitely...
I love tangents.
They definitely send some guys in suits, like the Men in Black, to roll up to your friend's house, and usually you'll get a phone call like, hey, are you in trouble, like, with the FBI or something? Like, what's going on? I haven't heard from you in a few months, but some guys in suits just rolled up to my house.
Well, they didn't warn you or anything? I at least had my buddy that called me, and he's like, hey, just to let you know, I listed you as a reference. So, and then soon after that, I got a call, and this guy's got a really crazy name, and when I ended up getting the call about this individual, I didn't understand the agent's pronunciation of the name. So I was like, I don't know who that is. And he's like, I hope you know who it is. He listed you as a reference on a TS.
We won't go off too much on the tangent. Let's move back. Kind of covered two of the topics that we were trying to get across. First one being the military pay compensation. Dan was saying, going with the TS clearance. Real quick, before we move to the third, I just want to say, for those of you guys who are in different fields, you may not have some of these opportunities, and that's just me being completely realistic. Some guys who are, for example, motor T or business administration, whatever your field is, you may not have an opportunity where you can go, work on Air Force One or work on Marine One or work on a submarine where you're given a TS clearance. But the point of this podcast is to kind of open your eyes to different tools that are out there. So it may not be one, but, I guarantee as time progresses that you'll hear something that can potentially affect you, your friends, or your family members in a positive light. So if you don't take something away, maybe it's something that you can pass on to someone else. But moving on to the third topic, Gerard, you had something really good that you wanted to talk about. I think it's really important that we start, bringing that up and mentioning how important it is before you get out of the military to kind of make that connection. So if you want to go ahead and kick that.
Yeah, so you had mentioned foresight earlier, and that's literally the topic that I wrote down when I was thinking about this. And it was was a good 2 years before I got out, and I didn't even know that I was going to get out. I had no real idea that I wanted to get out at that time, but I started exploring all of my other options that I had. I started looking into the civilian world. I started thinking, and I think everybody kind of has that idea where I'm coming up on my 8-year mark. I'm going to have to re-up eventually. Do I want to stay in? And it's like that make it or break it point. When you're at 8 years, 10 years, even 12 years, everybody that I've talked to, they've always been like, you know what? I guess I should consider whether I should get out or not, because if I re-up, I'm in for the rest of the 20 at least, right? So that was kind of what prompted me. But even the younger guys, even at the time when I was hitting like 3 years and I was coming up on my first enlistment, and whether I was going to re-up or not, I knew I was going to re-up, but even at that time, I was still putting together some ideas on what happens if I can't re-up, what happens if I could potentially cross-train. And then on the civilian side, like I said, 2 years before I got out, I started planning for all of that stuff. I started looking into making a really good resume. I started looking into federal jobs. And ultimately, that helped me out so much. If I hadn't done that, I would have been completely out on the street, literally. And I had my wife at the time. She was pregnant with twins. I was moving from another country, like I said before. And the whole reason that I got out of the military is because my dad got terminally ill. He was sick completely, and my dad raised me. So that was everything to me. I actually came back home, got him into treatment, and that's when I made the decision, I need to get out. And this was 6 months before I was actually going to get out anyways, or have to make the decision of re-upping, right? So I ended up just starting on my resume. It literally took me 1 year to polish my resume to the point where I could actually submit it and have it taken seriously. And that's a matter of just changing everything that you could possibly think of from military terms into civilian terms. And it's actually a lot more difficult and labor intensive than you might think.
Yeah, with all the acronyms and everything, like I was
Exactly.
supporting this project or whatever. Nobody in the civilian world knows what those acronyms mean. I was qualified QMOW. Like, you guys know what QMOW is?
No idea.
Quartermaster of the Watch, pretty big deal. And so, like, you have to translate everything.
That is such a good point. See, I got really lucky when I was making the transition and getting out. I made a phone call and said, hey, Ian, I'm coming back west. Some of the guys around the shop told me you guys are looking for people with my background, avionics,
Coming
working
out
on
west?
electronics. Yeah.
I pictured you just riding in on a horse.
There was actually a covered wagon.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, how it
That's
went
the
down.
only way to travel across country.
So anyways, I gave him a call and I said, I'm looking at making the transition, coming back home. I know you guys are looking for other QAs. Is there still positions available? So, I sent him my resume. He helped me out with it. But the biggest thing, like you were saying, Dan, is knowing the verbiage for the market you're trying to enter or the industry you're trying to enter, right? So just a few tiny ones for me. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was a collateral duty inspector, right? Which would be equivalent to a quality assurance inspector on the outside. Then you have QAs, QARs, quality assurance representatives, which would be like a quality assurance engineer or even a subject matter expert. So just knowing, how to translate some of those terms, not just on paper, but when I actually went in person in the interview, there were some questions that they asked me, and I'm not going to lie, I felt really stupid when they asked me like, hey, so have you done this before? And I'm like, can you break it down for me? So here I am going for an interview, having them break down questions for me. Don't recommend it. Do your research. But when they broke it down, it's like, oh yeah, I've actually done that. It's just, I'm used to different terminology in the Marine Corps, but I've done that. Here's some examples of that. Here's my experience and this is what I bring to the table. Luckily, they were pretty patient and they were able to kind of work through it with me.
Yeah.
But definitely the earlier that, you start talking to people in those industries, whether it's, friends, colleagues, or even just picking up the phone call and calling the company's HR like, hey, this is who I am, this is where I come from. You'd be surprised how many times you can call, an HR and just strike up a random conversation. I know, Gerard has a really good story about that, but you'd be surprised how many answers you can get from that and how much it can help you out.
So before I got into quality, I was actually a technician. And I remember my interview for that. The guy asked me, he's like, do you have any experience with cannon plugs? And I looked at him like, what the heck is a cannon plug? And then he showed me a picture. I'm like, oh, you mean an amphenol? And he's like, amphenol? I've never heard of amphenol. It's a cannon plug.
What? No, we call it cannon plugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Even in the military.
Yeah.
No, well, on the submarine, they were known as
Navy
amphenols.
guys.
I don't even know how to spell amphenol.
You guys
But
think you're so
then the other
special.
day, so we were working and they had a brochure out. I was inspecting some parts and it said on it Amphenol, and I just pointed at it to like 10 people. I'm like, you guys thought I was an idiot. No.
Debatable.
No, I think a lot of that stuff is really important. Not only the translation, but like you were saying, Kevin, as far as networking, it's everybody talks about networking, right? And it's become a cliche. And typically, if something becomes a cliche, it's for a reason. In this case, the reason that I landed the job that I did right out of the military was because I just asked one simple question to somebody that I had to call while I was working in QA back in Germany. So I ended up getting on the phone with this lady. I needed an address for a part that was deficient on an aircraft. And once I started speaking to this lady, I said, hey, what do you guys do over there? Literally, that was it. We had idle time. She was looking something up and I asked that one question, and that sparked just the snowball effect of me actually getting hired by that same person a year later. And it got to the point where I had only talked to her once or twice. And by the second or third time that I talked to her, I said, hey, I'm going to be visiting there in about 6 months. And I didn't even realize I was getting out, didn't have any foresight when it came to that other than just potentially making connections. And I asked her, I said, hey, I'm going to be in that area. Would you mind if I swung by and like see what you guys do? And she said, oh yeah, she used to be in the Air Force. She used to be a jet troop, which we worked right alongside, as I'm an electrician, or I was an electrician. So we had that connection. Just that simple question ended up leading to, yeah, let me see what you guys do. I went in and met her, had my wife with me. We were just BSing pretty much. And then just a few months later, that's when all of that whole situation with me happened. And she was the first person that I contacted. So and she said,
you were an electrician, but you got into QA.
Yes.
So
I was an electrician on aircraft, and then I became QA for an aircraft maintenance squadron.
Yeah. So like that's one of like the interesting things though, like with the resume, like I was submarine navigation and now I'm QA. And I did QA in the Navy. I was qualified QA, but when I wrote on my resume, I never wrote QA. I was not QA. My job in the military was electronics navigation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Because it was like a side duty almost?
Right,
or
exactly.
Like
it was a collateral duty. So
well, that was like training. Look at what I'm doing now. I'm training, and that was just a side duty of my quality assurance work.
Right, which what I'm trying to get to is when you're building your resume, you really have to look at who you're submitting this resume to.
Absolutely.
I was looking at a job in QA, so instead of writing that my job was submarine navigation electronics, I wrote that I was QA. And so when they looked at my resume, they said, okay, this guy has the experience. He's good to go.
And it's all about knowing how to tailor it to that specific job. You know, if you're looking at 6 different jobs just because they're in the same industry, we'll say aerospace industry because that's really, you know, my only area of expertise. But if you're looking at 6 different jobs, you know, from 6 different companies, each company is going to be looking for something similar, but there's going to be little things here and there that they put out in their, you know, their job searches or their postings.
Their recs,
that are
their
a little bit different. Exactly. So, you know, do your due diligence, look them up, see what the job posting says, and tailor it accordingly, because you don't want to just create one general one and send it out to everyone. A lot of the times now, they don't have time to go through all these resumes. You know, they'll put it through the scanner, it'll go through their database, and it's going to pick up keywords. So if you're not utilizing the terminology that they use or the acronyms that they use, you're keeping it generic or using military terms, whatever, you're going to be getting passed up. You may have all the experience that they're looking for, if not more, but because you're not tailoring your stuff to fit their criteria, you're doing yourself a disservice, and they're probably going to pick someone who could honestly be less capable than you are.
And that's huge too, because the hiring managers want to do as little work as possible when it comes to it. They want to find somebody to get in there as soon as possible. So if you can make it easy for them and actually match all of that stuff, as long as it's within reason, you don't want to lie on a resume, because eventually it's going to come back and they're going to expect you to do the job.
That's true.
But I was reading some statistic pretty recently. Don't quote me on it because I don't remember where it came from, but it was a huge number of individuals that will apply to positions that they feel they only like 50% qualify for, which I think is great, because you want to have a big selection, a big pool of individuals as a hiring manager. So why not get all of those individuals in there and then rack and stack them once you start getting to the cream of the crop, right? If you have nobody submitting to that, then they're just kind of SOL at that point. So why not? I completely agree with the idea of, even if you don't fully qualify for something, what's it hurt to actually put your resume in and say, these are what my qualifications are. If you think that they're garbage, then throw my resume in the garbage. That's fine. You know, I'm a firm believer in that.
It definitely doesn't hurt to give it a shot. They're not just going to look at you and laugh and say, oh, we'll never hire this guy. I mean, what's it even matter if they do? You're getting yourself a shot at a job.
Absolutely. And you'd be surprised at how many times people will train individuals, especially if they see someone that they feel they can train or has the right attitude. Yeah. Because working with someone is like a relationship more than it is. If you have somebody that's super qualified and they're just a terrible human being, I wouldn't want to hire that person. I'd rather hire the person that's only 50% qualified and the only other candidate, but they're a good person and you can tell that they're willing to be trained.
You got to ask yourself too, if they're super qualified and meet every checkbox, why are they applying to this job? Where are they coming from? Like, should they not be more ambitious going for the next job up? Like, if they meet everything.
How much am I going to have to pay them? Yeah, that's another question.
That's definitely true. Thank you guys for bringing up those topics. We covered quite a wide range of things, from paperwork, understanding your value and going into what you bring to the table, to learning how to negotiate and kind of sell yourself better, building those relationships. So those are all very valid points. Thank you for taking time out of your guys' day to speak to the listeners. And for all you listeners out there, thank you for taking the time to tune in. If you guys have any comments, suggestions, or struggles that you're going through, please bring them up. We're more than willing to do the research and point you in the right direction. If we don't have the answers, we'll dig them up or we'll talk to the people who do.
Thanks for listening to The Unwavering. Please rate and comment on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star and a great comment, and we may just read it on a future episode. Also, follow us on social platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Be sure to check back with us next week.